Let's
I have a
hope.
friend.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. So
Okay.
nice to meet you and good afternoon.
Thank you. Good to
Uh,
meet you too.
this is Monica Gheorghiu from Centrul Gifted Education in Bucharest, and today I'm going to have a short interview. I hope Mr. Mark Evans is going to give me more, maybe 1 hour. I'm very delighted to talk to a chief inspector who has been involved in accreditation all over the world. He's a founding partner in a company. One of the few companies that are doing accreditation all over the world is called Penta International. I think OFSTED is involved here. He was the youngest trained OFSTED inspector at one time. And led the smallest and the largest inspection teams in England in the same year. He was a head teacher in the UK and an executive principal in 3 different overseas schools. He is now traveling widely across the world. I just heard he's in Dubai now, and is one of the most experienced lead inspectors of British schools overseas, working nowadays, having inspected in over 20 countries, included Dubai, included the United Emirates. His doctoral thesis is in monitoring public-private partnerships in education. I'm really interested to know how many of these are around the world. And happy to meet you and happy to have some answers, because a lot of people are looking for schools which can give them diplomas. I don't know how much future in these diplomas nowadays, and what is the future of schools, basically, because many parents are looking to have their children happy, not necessarily to have getting them in schools. How do we work around this thing? What have you seen around the world in terms of schooling? What are the options?
Well, the wonderful thing is that for me personally, my driving belief in education is that parents and children should have options. For probably 80% of children, traditional school is fine. But 20% of students do not do well in those traditional schools. And it's those 20% that sometimes get forgotten. And I'm very concerned that we don't forget those 20%. My reaction, I mean, it's interesting post-pandemic. I was very hopeful that we would see a change in the way that diplomas and so on are assessed. Because really, I mean, from the British point of view, GCSEs and A-level, from an international point of view, things like the International Baccalaureate, those are all very good measures of how good you are at doing those exams. They're not a measure of your intelligence. They're not a measure of your understanding. They are simply a measure of how good you are at doing those exams. And I know some very smart kids who didn't do well in the exams. And I know some kids who weren't that smart who actually did do well in the exams because they learned how to answer the questions. Unfortunately, we're a few years out of the pandemic now. I think the opportunity to change the assessment systems is slipping by. I think that's a great shame. But you mentioned diplomas. The fascinating thing, and actually I've now inspected in 40 different countries, not just 20. In all of those 40 countries, there is a belief within government that examinations, 1 hour paper, 3 hour paper, sitting down, answering questions, means something. And yet employers in those countries are the first people to say, actually, this doesn't really help us. We may have students who have got good examination results, but
Yeah.
reality is when we put them into our organization, into our department, they don't do well because they don't know how to work in teams. They don't know how to do research. And, we live in an incredibly exciting age, not just with the internet, but now with artificial intelligence. If we don't create systems that use those facilities, those resources for our young people, I don't know where we'll be. I don't know. I think we'll be in a real mess because some people are frightened of artificial intelligence. I'm not. I wasn't frightened when spell check was invented. I didn't suddenly think, oh my gosh, people are going to not be able to spell anything. That's not true. But we need to keep a handle, keep close watch on how artificial intelligence is used. But it is ridiculous for us as the system, and I recognize that I am part of the system. If we don't address the fact that there are fantastic possibilities now for young people. And sometimes I've seen 10-year-olds doing work which in the curriculum is down for 16-year-olds because they've researched it themselves. In Romania, in Bucharest, I've met some very, very interesting students who are homeschooled, self-educated. They are very, very smart. They may not do very well in examinations, but that does not mean that they're not smart. The trouble is, how do we convince employers to try those people out? So it's a fascinating problem. There was a video maybe 5 years ago called Shift Happens, and it was about the fact that the world changes all the time. And there's a wonderful moment in the middle of that video where they talk about the job of a teacher, the job of a school, any educational organization, is to prepare children for jobs that do not exist yet, using technology that hasn't been invented yet to solve problems that we don't know are problems yet. So, any educational system that insists on teaching children the contents of a textbook are just automatically going to be completely out of date. We don't live in that world anymore. It was fine at the time, but it's not really where we're at now. We have many more opportunities.
Yeah, well, there are many authors who are talking about, killing creativity. The TEDx, the TED of Sir Ken Robinson, which is the most watched ever TED in the history of TED, about do schools kill creativity? We all talk about, having an innovative mind, a problem solver, creative thinker, creative, productive thinker, etc. These are the qualities that the companies are looking now, and still the schools are not required to do that kind of education. They are required that history, geography, math, science, etc.
Yeah.
So I think all over the world things are changing. Khan Academy has got a lot of attention. The school Ad Astra, Elon Musk, a lot of schools are changing and showing some other prospects to parents. Parents are looking for something else.
Yeah, I really hope so. I mean, the opportunities that we have now, with the home schools that I'm involved with, are incredible organizations. We have teachers all the way from Mexico to the Philippines, and they're all teaching the same students because we can do it online. And wherever we can, we will bring people together. But the opportunities we have, the strange thing is, I mean, a senior colleague of mine and good friend did this kind of work about 30 years ago.
Which kind of work?
With the online using
Online.
they built relationship with a school, and they were a school in the UK, and they built a relationship with a school in Norway, and it was incredibly successful. Teachers were able to teach to their strengths. They were able to take the gifted children to one side and give them extra additional work to do. All of those things were happening 30 or more years ago, and yet at the end of the project, nothing happened. That was just it. It was the end of the project.
Why do you think it happened like that? What happened underground?
But for me, I think, and it's the same with the assessment techniques. Unfortunately, it's an effect of the capitalist market that we all live in. The organizations which run GCSEs, A levels, and so on, they are commercial organizations. Whether they're for profit or not for profit doesn't make any difference. They're still commercial organizations that want to make lots of money so that they can invest in their own organization. And turning around and changing things is going to be very difficult for them. because it's like turning around a super tanker. If you want to turn left, you have to start turning left 3 miles earlier. And it's much easier to keep the status quo than it is to change, because change is always messy and some people don't want the change. It becomes a battle to change things. Even when people know it's kind of the right thing to do, they will still sometimes fight against it. So I think that particular project that I mentioned, it was well received and people were excited about the possibilities, but nobody had the passion to take it forward. So I'm happy that since the pandemic there are more organizations that like us, which are willing to look at different ways of doing things, and always be trying to keep up with the technology. The technology is developing in one side, education is developing in the other side. We need to make sure that they're together, because the technology will not go away.
If we're talking about technology, I think children are very interested in technology because it's presented to them as something that is going to solve their problems. I don't think, for example, that the human brain is ever going to change to be what it was supposed to be. We are social beings. We are emotional when we get born, and we die as emotional beings.
Yeah.
My coach was saying that we are born profoundly irrational. We're doing something in between, and we're dying irrational.
Yeah.
We're trying to get more, critical thinking developed, to connect the right and the left hemisphere and to get, a more aligned response to situations. But basically, I don't think a teacher can be, replaced by technology.
No.
Unless you do want to have a child with psychosomatic problems and psychic integration later.
Yeah.
I've seen this with children in our selections. They come with a lot of technology already in their hands, and I see their faces, I see their eyes, I see their movements. They are rigid. There is no creativity, personal, assertiveness there, and this is going to increase.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Why do they go to technology? Because it answers to their, questions, to their interests, to their stimulation, brain stimulation. But I don't think they don't know how good they could feel if they would have the right environment with kids with whom they could play in a different way than they do, learning also.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's us, the adults, that need to create that environment. Unless we're going to have some issues with these kids.
Well, I completely agree. The role of the teacher as the giver of knowledge, I think is long gone. I think teachers now have to be very clear about their role, and it's about facilitation.
Yes.
And really, it's very interesting. I've talked to some 14, 15-year-olds. They have great difficulty imagining focusing on something for more than 3 or 4 minutes. Because that's their world. TikTok, TikTok drives me crazy, because it is 30 seconds of nothing.
Yeah.
It's followed by another 30 seconds of nothing, and yet people will suddenly realize they've spent 2 hours watching it. And if you then ask those kids to develop an idea, or develop a dance, or develop a show, and give them 2 hours to do it, they find that very difficult. The concept of it will take us 2 hours to do that, because they don't know how to develop. And so I think you're right, that's one of the disadvantages of technology. But it's, I have to say, I make a big distinction between technology and social media. I think social media is not a positive influence on life.
Anyway, they're gaming a lot, not
Yeah.
only social media. They're
Yeah,
gaming,
absolutely.
gaming a lot. And it's like a knife. A knife, if you have a knife, you can also cut yourself with a knife, or you could cut the bread. And that's the difference we could always make with technology. A critical thinker would always tell you anything is good in this world unless it is abused.
Yeah.
So
There was some very interesting research. I think it goes back to people like Ken Robinson and Sir John Jones and so on. I think Malcolm Gladwin
Gladwell.
talks about it. You know, if you ask a group of young children, what can you think of that we could do with a paperclip? They
Yeah,
can
with a brick. He has a brick in
they can think of
the
hundreds of
book.
things. If you ask adults what to do with a brick or a paperclip, they struggle to find two. They can always find one,
Yeah.
but they struggle to find two. So somehow or other, the system has knocked that creativity out of them. And that's deeply worrying because we need to have creative people to solve the very major problems of the world.
Yeah, this example was given also by Sir Ken Robinson in the movie The Alphabet, which is a very acclaimed documentary on education. And he was telling about that at age 2, 98% of children are gifted, are genius level at divergent thinking. Exactly with this kind of, what would you do with a paperclip? They have many, many, many ideas, but when they grow at 20, they don't have those ideas anymore. They have 2, 3.
Yeah. It's the idea that you know, when you're in your 20s, you know that the paperclip is this big. But actually, when you're 3 years old, you can think, well, maybe if the paperclip was a mile high, we could use it to climb mountains. But that kind of divergent thinking is very uncommon later on, sadly.
Yeah, it's a muscle. You don't develop it, you lose it.
Yeah.
I think it can be recovered. For example, we work a lot with our brains with our team, and I see differences. It's just a matter of looking in that direction, and things can change. If I could just go into the idea of, you know, accrediting schools, you want to make the schools feel comfortable, get the right personnel, get the right idea about what they want to do. Right now, ICEOTAS is, I understand, is like a new type of thinking, what is happening in the education world. And you are willing to take this revolution on because there are many schools struggling to get themselves together.
Yeah, it's interesting how ICEOTAS came about. I was, as I've said, I'm very lucky. I travel a lot and I see a lot of different interesting educational organizations. And educational organizations often start in the same way. They start with one person who decides to educate their own child, and then maybe that child's best friend joins, and it gradually grows. And there, you know, there are schools, you know, St. Christopher's School in Bahrain started exactly that way. Kellett School in Hong Kong started exactly that way, in somebody's front room. And they now are big organizations with 2,000-3,000 students. And they've come a very long way. But I'm interested in what I was interested in the organizations which have grown a little bit, but have not yet got the processes and procedures in place. And I was concerned. I mean, our number one priority always in everything we do is for the safety of the children and the protection of the children. And it's a very interesting area to think about. Okay, if I decide to set up and educate my son, of course, I don't need to have any police checks or anything on myself because it's me. But actually, if I employ my best friend, I mean, even though he or she is my best friend, really, there ought to be pressure on me to make sure that there are police checks done. And that was really the start of the idea of ICEOTAS, that there are multiple organizations which are doing really interesting work in education, not conventional, but they still need to make sure that the children are safe, that the children have an educational plan in place, and that the organization itself is secure. There are too many organizations which rest on the strengths and the passion of one person.
Exactly.
You know, if that one person is kidnapped by an alien spaceship, what happens?
Exactly. Exactly.
You know, and it's really, you know, we were in Laos a few months ago, and if you can imagine this, we were visiting a part-time online boarding school, and it's a very, very strange, you know, title really. What happened in that school is that the children are educated online 3 weeks of every month. And then for the fourth week, they all fly to a boarding school building, and they are educated face to face for a week, living together, learning together. And it's a very unusual mixture. The government of that country does not know how to deal with them. Even though they recognize they're doing a great job. So we wanted to give them some sort of external validation. So ICEOTAS has accredited them. Now, I have never heard of that model before. You know, even now we've recognized it, I don't know I'll ever hear of it again. But that was the interesting thing, that the people, we have an advisory group for ICEOTAS, and one of the concerns they had when we started to write the framework for accreditation was making sure that the framework was loose enough that we didn't force these organizations to gradually get closer and closer together and become more and more the same, because we don't want that. We want them to do what they think. And you know, what works for you may not work for me, may not work for the person down the road. It has to come from your passions and your understanding of the needs of the children that you're working with. So it's a very interesting area. But that's really the background to ICEOTA.
There's a lot of hope when I hear these things. Which are the prerequisites for a school to get ICEOTAS accreditation? When does the relationship between you and the new organization start into play?
Well,
What has to happen?
we are you know, when we set up the council, we took advice from various governments. Now, I cannot say that it would be wrong of me to say that we are backed by those governments, but we have talked to governments, including in the UK, and said, you know, if we do this, do you see any problems? You know, is there anything that you can see that would make life difficult? And they have all said absolutely not. They're all very, very interested in what we're doing and how we're doing it. And I think the the easy way to think of it is that you know, we put the child, if you like, front and center, or that's the phrase. The most important thing that we look at is, are the children safe? That's the number one priority. And you know, most organizations that we work with will respond, well, yes, of course they are. Of course they're safe. But they have to be able to think about it a little bit more deeply than that. Because as soon as you start employing other people, having other people involved in your organization, that if you like, that trust disappears to some extent. Because you're, you know, very interesting. Another organization that we work with, which is based in one of the Canary Islands, they have a lot of volunteers who come. And the rule when those volunteers arrive for the first few days is you should not approach the children. You can talk to the children if they come to you, but do not go chasing after the children. They will come to you. And I think that's a very wise way to set things up, because you can very quickly so there are certain people who just have a connection to children, not necessarily of the same age, but those are the ones who the children will seek out. And it's a much better way of making sure that the children are safe. The second thing, apart from, you know, if child protection and child safety is the first thing, attendance is the second. And you know, that can be an interesting discussion point for some organizations, because you know, some of the people who are involved in those organizations are you know, want to make something that is not traditional. They're seeking actively to make something that is non-traditional. And attendance registers sounds very traditional. But to be honest, if the students are not attending, it's impossible for there to be any significant impact. So the organization needs to be looking at attendance. I mean,
Yeah,
at one point
policy.
I worked in an organization in the UK, which was a government organization. And we provided education provision for people who either had very severe behavior difficulties or had real trauma, phobia of going to school. And, sometimes we would celebrate because one particular child had managed to come to school 2 days in a week. And we used to say to people who questioned that, listen, 2 days in a week is fantastic because before that they were only doing 1 day a week. We've doubled their attendance. So attendance is really, really important. The third area, I think, is to do with spiritual, moral, social, emotional, cultural, personal development and welfare. And that's something that any organization has to be actively involved with. It's not enough just to imagine that it will happen on its own. It will not. It needs to be looked at and monitored and, in a sense, designed so that children are developing. And by spiritual, I don't mean religious, absolutely not. I mean in terms of self-awareness and awareness of other people. The sense of awe and wonder that you should have about the world, and it's back to previous parts of our conversations. When you're 2 years old and you see a puddle of water on the ground and
Yeah.
you splash a stick in it, that's just amazing. It's absolutely fantastic. That is spiritual development to me. It's the realization that you can impact on the world like that. So that's really the third part. Fourth part is to have a plan. I believe in options for parents and options for children. I find it more difficult to accept the notion that children will just teach themselves. I do think there has to be a plan of some sort, and that the adults involved need to be aware of what that plan is and to be monitoring that plan and to be working with the child on what the plan is. It's not a question of what we should do for the child, it's what the child wants themselves. And then the last two really are the outcomes. What happens at the end when a child's been involved in your organization for 2 or 3 years? What happens? Do they do well? How well do they do compared to what? And finally, to do with the vision of the organization, the vision and leadership. And that can be, if there are 300 organizations, then there are 300 different visions. And there has to be a clear strategic plan led by the right people for that. So, I mean, in a sense, it's those 6 different things, but everything always starts with child protection and child safety, and goes through attendance and the other things that I've mentioned.
How many kids should be enrolled? The basic.
I don't think there's a number. I think it's to do with for some students. I mean, we've worked with some severely autistic children who find it very, very difficult indeed to be with any other child. And one would be crazy to say, well, they must be in a group of 3. That's not true. There's no rule that says that. If you imagine that that you set up a provision for one child and it's just for that child, to keep testing, seeing, okay, the child is 6 months older now, the child is 2 years older, what's the situation now? That's important too, not to get stuck into a one track. But the research, which teachers often find very difficult to believe and understand, is that it's to do with the quality of the provision and the quality of the facilitation, not to do with the number of students. And schools, expensive schools that say, oh, we only have 10 children in the class, compared to maybe a government school that has 60 children in the class. Well, I've seen classes of 10 that are learning nothing, and I've seen classes of 60 that are learning a lot. So it's to do with the provision, it's not to do with the number.
I see. So any organization who has those prerequisites could come over to you, even if there are 2 children.
Absolutely, absolutely.
If they're catering for two kids.
To be honest, I think it would be an interesting question if it could be a provision for 1. I mean, I would be interested in looking at that. 2 is probably the minimum.
Company.
It would be
3 is a crowd. 2 is company.
Exactly.
3 is a crowd.
Something like that. But you know, we try very hard not to let our preconceptions. I mean, one of the things that I've learned as I've traveled the world is that all the things that I thought were true when I was 25 years old, are not true. They're only true in that context. You know, you realize that what you think will work in one place does not work somewhere else. So you have to be open-minded. And I think that it worries me that too many people involved in education are actually very close-minded. They think that there is only one way to teach reading, or you know, and the whole of psychology, the whole of education in the academic world, and I worked at the University of London for some time. And it used to really frustrate me because on particular issues, it was very, very clear that the answer that we were all looking for was somewhere in the middle of 2 extreme positions. But people would always prefer to take one or other of the extreme positions and fight. And you know, the world of academia is one of the most vicious that I've ever come across. And you know, people did not look like they were seeking any sort of answers or solutions to problems. They just looked like they were fighting each other. So I think it's very important to keep your mind as open as possible and to accept as a possibility. I mean, you know, I don't have many rules in my life, but one of the rules is some people who think, any person who thinks they're 100% right, I don't trust. Because if you have that level of self-belief, I think you're missing something. You know, the more I study, the more experience I have, the more I realize how little I know, rather than the other way around.
Yeah, totally agree. So how about the policies? I understand that they should be written out in English.
Well, for ICEOTAS, they can be written out in any language. It doesn't have to be in English. We have no problem with having things translated, and it's to do with the impact of those policies. And you know, organizations sometimes say to me, "What policies should we have?" And I always turn the question round and say, "I don't know. What policies should you have?" because there is no this is not like a tablet of stone from on high. This is to do with what policies do you need to make sure that your children are safe, to make sure that they're attending. You know, I've seen an education policy on what to do if there is an elephant in the playground. Now,
because it could happen.
That's unlikely to be
in India, Bangladesh could happen, I think.
In Bucharest, I'm assuming that would be very unlikely, and I would not suggest that you need to have that policy. But you know, I mean, there are certain things which I mean, I guess attendance would be an interesting one. Yeah, it's useful for there to be some written expectations, not just because the accreditors would want to look at it, but because the parents and the students would want to look at it. They need to know what your expectations are.
And they need to know the limits.
Exactly.
They need to have a limited room for playing. Sometimes there is room for play. And sometimes there is no room for play. And that's when we feel secure. That we have a relationship with some grounds.
Absolutely right. And it's, you know, if you're lucky enough to have your own children, you know or will have experienced the fact that you know, being a parent does not always mean that you're going to be popular with your children, because there are times when you have to say no, that is a limit that you cannot cross. But that is when the children understand in a very deep sense that you care for them and that you will protect them. And just letting children do whatever they want to do is not a sign of love.
Yeah, yeah. It's a psychological need to have limits,
Absolutely.
to have boundaries.
Yeah.
How about the personnel? Should they speak English for when you come on the inspection? What does it happen on the day or on the days?
That's not an issue for us. We're not you know, we I mean, of course, because I come from the UK and I speak English as my first language, I'm naturally biased towards that. But we do that in terms of the organization, as long as we can have somebody who can translate for us, then that's really not an issue. There's no reason why it has to be an English speaking organization. Or, I mean, I always counsel teachers and facilitators who are involved with our work to do what they normally do. So if they normally speak in, let's say, Vietnamese, then they should carry on speaking. If they suddenly start speaking in English or half in English, the students are going to turn around and say, "What? Why is she suddenly talking like that?" We need to see things as they normally are. And if there's a problem that we don't understand something, then we can follow that up. That's our problem, not the organization's problem.
How long does it take the visit usually, or the first visit? Let's say the first.
Depending on the size of the school, the first visit is always 1 day. And if it's a very small organization, it may even just be half a day or 3/4 of a day. And then for the full visit that leads to the accreditation, that's always at least 1 day. And if it's a large organization or it's split site, then it would be more than 1 day. But you know, organizations that have, I mean, for example, the part-time online boarding school I mentioned is actually one site of a number of different sites and countries. And we agreed with that group that we would have to visit each site for 1 day. So we did them separately, even in different countries. So we were flying from Laos to Thailand and so on.
What do you do on the visit?
The number one activity for us is sitting and listening to the students and the adults talking what they're doing. So, you know, if there is a session that starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, we want to be there at some 7:45. We want to see the students coming in. We want to see how they're greeted, what happens for the first 5 minutes when they're there, what happens to the child who comes 5 minutes early and the child who comes 10 minutes late. And so the vast majority of our time on that day is spent in the room where the children are. And then because we will have already done some pre-work, looking at policies and procedures, education plans. You know, we have a template that we ask, we don't ask, we offer to the organization if they want to use it, so that they can be sure that we understand what we're seeing, because that's really important. You know, it's not about us requiring a plan, it's about the organization being sure that we understand what we're looking at. So that can be very helpful. But the vast majority of our time is spent with the children, talking to the children. You know, it is possible for teachers, adults are very good at saying the right thing, but children, students will almost always tell you the way that they see the way that they see it. You know, it's I mean, I've been an inspector, as you said, for a very long time, and I firmly believe there isn't such a thing as a truth. There are different perceptions of what the truth is. So that you know, the teachers might have a slightly different perception to the parents, who will have a slightly different perception to the children, and the children who are 5 will have a different perception to the children who are 15, and so on. So it's our job to sort of pull all of those together and create one sort of message.
So I would understand that this day when you're coming over, it means talking to the kids is like an open day. Should we announce that for the children?
We hope it will be a normal day, whatever you would normally be happening.
With a guest, with a special guest.
Yeah, exactly right. And actually, to start off with, the first few hours, we try very hard to be very quiet and, sink into the background, so that we don't disturb things too much. I mean, of course, it's impossible. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, the very fact that we're there changes things. But we try not to be a big influence to start off with. So when we're talking to children, it's break time or lunchtime or before school starts. And then maybe in the afternoon we might have a formal session where for half an hour we take 50% of the students into a different room and talk to them. But every model is different, because we try to make the model of accreditation fit the organization.
Are there any possible mishaps that could happen during the visit or after? What is happening generally?
The reason that we don't insist, but we do strongly advise organizations to have a preliminary visit. That preliminary visit is a health check. So if there are major problems, I can give you all sorts of examples of mishaps and mistakes that we managed to stop having any influence. That an organization which had removed all the fire doors from the building, and yet were very, very commonly using naked flame cookers and so on. We spoke to them and said, listen, for us, that's a big problem. And I would suggest that until you fix that problem, you do not ask us to come back for the formal visit. That sort of thing. We are fundamentally involved in trying to improve education. So, wherever an organization is, wherever a school is, we want it to be benefiting from us being there. That was drummed into me by the very first inspector who taught me how to be an inspector. He said, the organization, and he actually said, forget about the rules, you should make sure that the organization benefits from you being there. Otherwise, you're wasting their money and you're wasting your time.
Nice.
So it doesn't matter. I've been in some of the very best education provision you can imagine, and I've also been in some of the worst. But every single organization, I hope, benefits from an external view.
Is it ICEOTAS? I've heard that you've had already a workshop in Bucharest.
Yeah.
Where even the director of RACIP and the secondary director, second in charge, attended, and you were very happy with that.
That was not an ICEOTAS course. It was a course to do with the British schools inspection. But they were very interested in coming. We were delighted that they came. They were given no special treatment. That was the interesting thing. And I had to say to them at the beginning, listen, I will not give you any special treatment. If you decide to disappear to take a phone call, that's your problem, not my problem. And they were brilliant, absolutely brilliant. They studied as hard, if not harder, than everybody else in the group. And I hope, we certainly benefited from them being there. And I hope that they benefited by our conversation, which, of course, although it was focused on British curriculum schools, it also talked about other education provision and ICEOTAS accreditation and so on. So it certainly, I think we benefited from their presence, and I hope that they learned some things from us as well.
Now, putting in perspective, BSO versus ICEOTAS, I also had my questions about when can you migrate from one to another, which is the biggest difference between them, and when should you go to ICEOTAS and when should you go to BSO, or you could go from one to another.
Yeah.
Why and what would be the reason?
The biggest difference is that BSO is managed by the British government. So they are not interested, and why should they be? They are not interested in organizations which do not see themselves as British. So if an organization doing a fantastic job but doesn't see itself as being British, there's no point in even thinking about BSO. It would be 100% ICEOTAS. Now, there are
I
some organisations which use the British curriculum, which do refer to the UK, but the acid test for BSO schools is if students from an organisation that was BSO went back to the UK, would they fit into traditional schools in the UK easily? Now, that is true for BSO schools, and it probably would not be true for some ICEOTAS schools. You know, if, for example, the language of instruction is Thai, those students would not be able to go back to the UK. So even if they were following a British curriculum but taught in Thai, it would be difficult to imagine them going back to the UK or transferring to the UK. So that's the biggest difference. ICEOTAS is meant to be very inclusive, and yes, you know, we have certain immovable tenets, mainly to do with child protection. BSO has more immovable tenets because it is organised and run and monitored by the British government through OFSTED. So Ofsted are the people who monitor us when we're doing BSO schools.
ICEOTAS is it going to be maybe not recognized by Ofsted? I understand, but can in the future, no?
It's difficult to imagine why Ofsted would recognise or not recognise ICEOTAS. I mean, they're not interested in that provision. So it's not a question of them recognizing it or not recognizing it. They just wouldn't be interested. You know, we went as far when we were setting the council up. We talked to the Department for Education, and they were very happy that we were doing it, but they're not following what we're doing. You know, they're not interested in boarding schools in Thailand. They only have responsibility. And it's like civil servants in every government. They have a particular set of responsibilities, and anything that's outside of that is fine. But it's not necessarily their role to look at that.
But could it be that, for example, the Romanian government would recognize ICEOTAS as coming from a British model?
I think that's a possibility. I mean,
and not in the UK having the ICEOTAS as an official recognition of.
I mean, I think that's really why we're talking to people in certain countries, because we want, in a sense, the way we see it is that we're offering a service to the governments, because every government around the world sort of scratches its head as to what to do with these strange organizations that don't send their children to a traditional school. Now,
and they have different needs, and
exactly.
the children have different needs.
If they can end up feeling comfortable with the fact that they're accredited by an international organization that has high standards, that helps the government too. So that's really what we're looking for. I mean, it's very interesting in the Philippines, for example, to take a different country as an example. They have had what they call ALS, alternative learning systems. They've had those in place for 25 years. So ICEOTAS is a very small jump for them, because they recognize the fact that because of the population of the Philippines and the way that the society works and the economics work, they have to be much more flexible. So you know, children do gain their education in many different ways, not just in traditional schools.
I see. What would be the cost, the difference of becoming a member, accredited member, ICEOTAS versus BSO, or what would you like people to know when they come to you, which is more easy or easiest?
Yeah, it's not really to do with it's impossible to say that one is easy and one is difficult. It depends on the organization. You know, for a school that's going to do BSO, many schools find that easy because they already know the standards. They know that it comes from the UK government. They've been aware of the standards for a long time. The cost is higher for BSO. Because we have to factor in the monitoring by Ofsted and other overheads. ICEOTAS, it's a much smaller organization that we keep the costs right down, so that it's a not-for-profit organization. The costs are probably roughly half of what that they would be for BSO. But I mean, so far we've not had any organization that has gone from ICEOTAS to BSO, but it is theoretically possible. But an organization that we thought on a preliminary visit was ready for ICEOTAS, we would also be looking to see if it was ready for BSO. And if it was ready for BSO, then we could certainly do both at the same time, and that would minimize costs as well. That would be possible. But it would be the BSO part that I would always be most concerned about, because ICEOTAS is very egalitarian, it's very open. BSO, those standards are written by the British government, and there is no room for play in that. So it's a much tighter set of rules.
When is it possible, for example, to get a visit, meaning that when the team is ready, when the children are already comfortable with a new school or in the environment that they're offered, when would you advise someone to call you for an inspection, for this preliminary inspection? When is the right time?
Well, I think that's to do with when the school or the organization is ready. We have to think, it's a very different setup to government organizations. When the Romanian Ministry of Education inspectors visit a school, they go when they want to. In BSO and ICEOTAS, we are there by invitation. So you would invite us to come to your school on a certain date in March, and we will say, I'm sorry, we don't have any personnel available that day, so we'll look for another date. I always say to groups and schools, if you can give us 3 options, look at your diary. When do you think would be 3 suitable dates? Let us have those, and we'll probably be able to meet at least one of those dates.
Wonderful. So if you would like one question that I didn't ask you. Which is the greatest question that I could ask you and I didn't ask?
Do you know, you're very clever, because I always say when I'm interviewing people exactly the same. Is there anything that you wished I'd asked you because you had a really good answer? I don't have a really good answer for anything. So I don't think you've missed any questions. I think what I've tried to do is to make clear the difference between BSO and ICEOTAS, but also the similarities. I mean, everything is focused on school improvement. All of
so you're a friend. You're a friend. You're a friend, not
well, I mean,
friend.
There's a phrase in British law, which is to do with being a critical friend.
Yeah.
So it's being a friend who loves you enough to say, actually, I don't think you're doing that right. Not a friend who just agrees with everything that you're saying. And what drives me is what I've mentioned before. We always want to make sure that we've added some value. Because whether it's £1,000 or £10,000, it's still a cost. We don't want that to be a waste of money. We want the organization to think back and say, I mean, I love it when I visit organizations maybe 3 years on, and the owner or the head teacher will say, I always remember what you said.
Nice.
That makes me think, wow. That's great if we've had that sort of impact. So that's the thing to bear in mind, I think.
Speaking of how often you would visit the schools, would it be 2 years?
3 years. It's a 3-year cycle.
Every 3 years.
Yeah.
And I heard that you're already starting, or you already had a Penta International representative in Romania. Could you tell us something about it?
I run a lot of different organizations. One of the organizations, which is the training centers, they have a representative. in Romania. But we do also have some of our lead inspectors live in Romania and are Romanian, in fact.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I think I think I know the person, Adriana, somehow. Yeah,
No,
I know
no,
her.
no.
Yes, she's on the website.
No,
Maybe
that's
Adriana Brescu.
Adriana is sits on our advisory board because of her view of the way that education should work. She's a very inspiring thinker. But no, the Penta International lead inspector is the principal of one of the schools, one of the
Oh,
British schools in Romania.
okay. So far so good.
Well, I'm
Thank you.
very happy. I mean, if
Thank you
people
for
have
this.
questions that they would like to follow up, if you have questions, then I'm very happy to do that. You know, I'm not the easiest person in the world to track down,
Yeah,
but
guaranteed.
I'm very happy to take emails or WhatsApp messages or to try and set up another meeting at another time.
So they could find you on Penta International website.
Penta International on FilBrit's training center. And on ICEOTAS. All of my contact details are there. So some of the contact details are the same, some of the contact details are different.
But I can guarantee you can be found. I could talk to you, and
Sooner or
that's
later,
really great.
even if I try to hide, I'm
Yeah,
unsuccessful.
yeah. It was nice, really nice talking to you, and I'm glad we did it in January. I hope it's
Excellent.
going to be a great year for both
Fantastic. Well,
organizations.
Happy New Year. It's a bit late for Happy New Year, but Happy New Year anyway.
It's going to be
It's
happy.
been a great pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. I'll come back to you and send you a link about this.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much indeed.
Have a great day there.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, bye.